Hey, everybody. I'll just wait for a little bit to get some more people in, but this is a really, really great topic to discuss, which is performance anxiety, how to fix a nervous, shaky voice. I just like to say first and foremost that you're not alone if you have this experience. It's very, very common. It's scary and vulnerable to sing in front of people, and so that can be a really, really common thing. In fact, I just always like to point out that there are tons of examples of professional singers and really, really famous professional singers who struggle with performance anxiety, get really severe anxiety from performing. And so I'm not going to name people, but there's lists of those. I recommend looking them up just to point out again that you're not alone in this pursuit of trying to find confidence and ease while you perform. I've experienced it. We all do. In fact, it's kind of just par for the course as a performer to battle your nerves. And I always like to say, a lot of times we're really nervous about singing and performing because we care about it. And that's a really good thing, always about reframing things. When we care about something, it can make us fall into some anxiety and fear about various things. And we're going to talk about some strategies here. So this isn't just all going to be like a big lecture about you should feel better and try to stay positive. There's actually some really, really cool things that you can do to sort of hack your system and try to get into a calmer nervous system state. So we're going to talk about that. In fact, some of this stuff, if you've been following me and the courses, hello, hi, welcome, Alex. Some of these things are actually some stuff that I do in my practice very routinely. And I just don't always explain it 100% of the time, like why we do it. But it is actually to calm our nervous system and to get into a state where we're comfortable performing and expressing ourselves and shaking off the rest of the day. Sometimes we get really, really overstimulated. And so there's lots of reasons, again, why we can get kind of shaky and nervous. And as a disclaimer, I just want to point out that these are some tricks for, pretty normal, moderate anxiety and such. And I don't want anyone to think like this is a substitute for any kind of mental health therapy or anything like that. If you're having really serious anxiety and such, there's health professionals that you can talk to that can help with things too. So, but here's some strategies, and I'm really excited to show them. I picked these up along the way. Some of them are from reading and research, and I really recommend any of you who are following me today, mention some stuff in the chat room about like what your experience is with nerves, any tricks that you've maybe come across, right? Because some of this is about our routine and our general strategy from day to day. So I'll get started. So again, you're not alone in this experience. We all feel it. And it can be this sort of spiral that can, once you feel nervous, it can amplify and it can get really intense and you can feel pretty strange sometimes performing and then be like, why am I going through this process of trying to perform even when I feel all of this anxiety and it's really uncomfortable, but at the same time, I also really want to do it. And so this is for you. I'm this way. I mean, again, a lot of performers can be this way because we care a lot about what we're doing and we can get really in our head about it. So the first thing is actually some physical stuff that we can do to sort of help with this concept. So obviously stretch, I always tell people like right before when I do a lesson, I'm always like, okay, take a moment, stretch out, do this a little bit ahead of time. A great stretching routine is always really, really helpful. But I want to talk a little bit more about why we do some of the breathing exercises that we do. I mean, this seems obvious if you've done any other sort of meditation things, but by working on diaphragmatic breathing, belly breathing, and a long exhale, we actually calm our nervous system. There's tons of studies about all of this. So this is why I do this kind of thing. I'll take a deep breath. I'll do my hiss thing and I'll go like, and I'll try to work into a flow. And that does regulate our nervous system. Of course, it's also about from some of my other things I've talked about, like SOVTs and feeling support in your belly and your back. But it's also actually about calming your nervous system. and getting into a relaxed state. So I always recommend like do some breath exercises before you start singing. And in particular, you know, sometimes I do these pulsing ones, but in particular, focus on the long, kind of even breath stuff. You might find that your body kind of lurches at you, and that can be a sign that you're maybe not quite in the right nervous state, and you might be a little agitated. And so by doing this, you can actually slow that down. So I'll take deep breaths. I try to sink into my belly. And then I'll sort of demonstrate what the lurching kind of feeling might be like. You might be doing this and be going like, there's like this thing. It's hard to demonstrate because it's such a physical thing. That can happen in your voice too. I don't know if you've experienced that, but it can kind of feel like a little lurchy and unstable. And again, this is part of this practice, is to try and find that smooth coordination. And then the next thing is, why do we do the humming? So last time I talked about the resonance and exploring your resonance and that sensation and finding a smooth tone. But humming, actually, it's really cool. Look it up. It really helps you modulate your nervous system as well and come to a more rest and relaxation state. So there's all sorts of reasons for why you produce more nitrous oxide when you're humming. And then by breathing and humming and kind of doing this process, that can help to relax the system. And the point is, we have what we call the vagal nerve, and it runs through our pharynx and alongside our vocal cords. And by humming, we actually stimulate that and help create vagal tone. I know it sounds very heady, but this is actually like a very physical practice that you can do. And it actually, you know, this is kind of my point with singing in general. It can be primarily a wellness activity. You can use it to calm yourself down. Of course, we get into this whole state of trying to like impress people and do all sorts of things, and it can get really nerve-wracking. But hack into that sort of primary thing that we can do with our voice, which is stimulate our vagal nerve and create tone there and relax ourselves. So I know, so in some of my things, you guys have seen this, I'll do this like, and I'll do this for a while with my students. And yeah, again, some of it is to stretch and open up the vocal cords, to get stuff off of our cords. Yes, exactly. We're gonna talk about this, Gary. Very, very good. But yeah, actually doing the humming, aside from clearing our cords and gaining a sensation of resonance, it actually does help calm down your nervous system. So just like Gary, if you're in a busy schedule and you're, going right to a performance thing, take a moment and do this. Even if you feel like you're pretty warmed up, take a moment and it'll help sort of calm yourself. And again, we're going for more of a kind of consistent tone with that kind of practice. But this is something that I don't really do in any of the lessons, because it's kind of my own personal practice, but I just want to share it with you guys here. You can hum for yourself. And so again, this is why I don't share this with people all the time, but, explore and make up a little melody. This is an old practice that we can do, and it might seem silly, but it really does actually calm you down. And so I'll just kind of demonstrate. I kind of like sitting in a minor mode, but it doesn't really matter. I'll do something where I'm like, and again, this isn't for showing off. You can make a really pretty melody like that, but do it for yourself, and you can actually realize that you can soothe yourself. This goes back to like what mothers do to soothe a child, but you can do it for yourself, and it's actually a great way to explore your inner composer. Is you'll find that you have these little inner melodies that are sort of lurking around in your mind, and again, by humming, taking a breath, and then humming again, you can actually soothe sort of that shaky agitation. And some of it, again, is by kind of having this consistent engagement with our breath, that feeling of, these sort of long lines. You could see I was sort of moving around in a very slow and relaxed way. I highly recommend that. If you don't do that, it can be really, really helpful. And it also does this other thing, which is sometimes we get in our head about trying to be very serious about singing and performing. And sometimes it can be like we're doing something in a really important moment in our life, like singing for a wedding or a funeral. But I recommend like give yourself some time to play with your voice, just like that. That's sort of like the gentle humming can be a really great way to do this. Especially if you're a little nervous about singing out really fully, do it internally for yourself. It can be really, really helpful. I find with all of my colleagues when we're working on difficult music, I find it's sort of a general thing that we try to kind of stay light and humorous about it. Sometimes our rehearsals can be really silly with my choir. And I think it's important to do that just to make sure that you're playing a little bit and you're exploring your voice through play rather than just thinking about like being really serious and trying to, hello, hi, and trying to impress people, right? So we'll get back to some of those concepts in a bit. So again, humming is really, really helpful. It may seem silly. You might want to rush over it, but if you're finding that your voice is lurching and you're shaking a little bit, go back and try to see if you can hack your system by doing some humming and some deep breathing. And then there's this funny thing that happens actually, and a lot of my students will probably know this very well. You do this for a few minutes and you might find that you elicit a yawn. That's a really good sign that your body is dropping into a more rest and relaxation state. So you want to pay attention to these signals, right? And that's going to really, really help you a lot. So the other thing actually too, just on the physical side of things in preparation, is there's some known foods and things that can really help. One, for example, is eating bananas. I know it sounds silly, but they're natural beta blockers in there, which help us deal with our stress hormones, cortisol, right, being a big one. And then there's also magnesium and lots of other things in there that are really helpful. So sometimes these supplements can help you. I'm not going to go super deep into that, but it's a fun trick, like eating some bananas, doing things that help you stay in a slightly more relaxed state. So that's just one of them. Again, I'm not going to go super deep into that, but look it up and you can actually find that there's lots of foods that help you deal with your anxiety on a more physical level, just kind of cutting that edge. So we use all these tools. And again, sometimes singing and performing can become like a lifestyle because this stress and anxiety can kind of build up from thing to thing when you don't feel very prepared for something you're doing. We have all these funny statements of like white knuckling, right? Which is a concept of doing something where you're not really sure and you're just kind of like tight and riding through it. And so again, all of these sort of tactics are trying to help us find an easier kind of flow state. So another one, this is kind of a fun practice that I learned in college. And actually, you'll find that there are lots of practices that do this kind of stuff, yoga, qigong, but one of them is doing sort of a shake concept. And I like to do it this way, actually, in particular. So I'll take a moment and I just try to do a free shake and kind of shake my body out, right? So I'm going to go like, kind of shake it out, especially feeling a lot of agitation. And then the next thing I do is I shake it out half the speed that I just did it. So I might do like trying to gain control over this, right? Getting the fidgets out. And then I'll do half the speed of that. Just shake a little more to the point where you go half to half to half to half, where you just have this sort of nice buzz of energy. This leads me to a concept, right? Like sometimes we're in we think about like, I need to get rid of my stress and my anxiety. And it creates this sort of like enemy relationship with your anxiety and stress, any of these negative thoughts that kind of come your way. I like to say first and foremost that stress and anxiety is just how we do stuff and how we handle things that we need to do. And it's just more about managing the stress and learning how to sort of process it and use it to your advantage. So this shake concept of like, shake it out, get your body activated, then shake it out halfway and shake it again. We want a little bit of this buzz. We want some of that adrenaline because it helps us be a performer and have energy and everything like that. So That's one concept. The other one is, and this comes from like a Qigong practice as well, but you can actually tap out your body. And it might seem really silly, but again, what you're doing is you're building awareness, and you're getting that buzz in your body. And that can be really helpful actually as well. Yes, yeah, okay, about the breath stuff. You know, I find that it can be both through your nose and your mouth, but there's a danger, and this sometimes I think where some teachers, why some teachers talk about this, you don't want to like sip or try to like pull the air in with your throat. So that sounds kind of like, or right, because that's going to dry out your cords. So really, when I think about taking a breath, and this is kind of, it's like funny answer to what your question, I just keep my face, my mouth, and my nose relaxed. And I try to breathe more with a pressure vacuum system with my belly and my back. So it's this idea of pulling in air by expanding my body. And actually, there's a really nice practice for this that I do with a caution. Don't do this excessively because you might hyperventilate. But you can actually work on that kind of pressure inhalation by pushing out all of your air on like 3 pulses. You're going to squeeze it in. This is all kind of like what we don't want to do when we're singing with the muscles, but we're just using it to get this feeling of relaxing and pulling in our breath just by expanding our body. So I'll show you what I mean. I go like this. Push all that air out. And then I just let the air come in by dropping my belly, my back, and expanding out. So that's sort of a longer answer to your question, but it's through your nose and your mouth. I think just in general, we want to avoid trying to, pull in things here and squeeze from this area because that'll cause some irritating air. So you might notice, listen to it and you might notice that you're doing something like that where you can hear the sort of faster airflow. It should be more like this. The air just kind of comes in. My old teacher would say, just drink in the air, like let it come in through your mouth and your nose. Okay, so that's that concept. Again, shaking and tapping can really, really help you sort of get some of this antsiness out. And it's this concept of not fighting it, right? Actually just go with it and then try to dial it back bit by bit. And then actually the other thing I want to talk about with the tapping thing. So sometimes we get really agitated when we're nervous, and then sometimes we can dissociate, which is where we're just feeling like everything's kind of disappearing. You kind of get like tunnel vision. This can help to kind of keep you a little active and in your body. And we're going to talk about some of that concept a little more later as well. But that's that. So another concept too, and I find this one to be very, very helpful, is to use some common acupressure points to help you. And again, these are just physical concepts to sort of hack the system and calm your nervous system down. There's also, we're going to talk about the mental thing in a second too. It's mind-body connection. But there's a couple points that we can go over that can be really helpful. One of them is in between your thumb and your finger here, and you can press this area and squeeze it, and that can help calm anxiety and nerves. And again, look into this. Acupressure is a huge field, and there's lots of research about it. And actually, in fact, this point, I wanted to mention this because you have to be careful. Like our body can respond in lots of ways. So if you're pregnant, for example, apparently it's contraindicated. You don't want to rub this point too much. Something you just learn from science things, but it shows you that this can have a really big response on your nervous system. I'm not going to go into details for why, but don't rub this point if you're pregnant. But if you're feeling some nerves and you aren't, this can be a really great point. And then I'd say probably one of the most helpful points is this one. So it's 3 fingers below your wrist and then right in between these tendons here. And you can rub this point. I believe it's pericardium 6, but again, don't worry about that. You can rub this point, and it's really great if you're feeling a little nauseous from nerves. And also if you're having that racing heart concept, it can actually help to slow that down a little bit, which is really, really fascinating. Sometimes that can be so frustrating, right? You're trying to sing and be in the music to a particular pulse, and your heart is beating out of pulse, right, in a different place. And that can be very disorienting. So you can actually gently sort of rub this point on either side. and then also in between your thumbs. And this can be a really, really helpful trick actually for a lot of people. So yeah, I recommend that. Acupressure, shaking, tapping. You can make a little exercise about it to get ready for performing. And you'll find that, a lot of people do this kind of intuitively, but there's actually really age-old practices of this. So again, like Qigong, there's some stuff in yoga and acupressure and acupuncture eventually. These things are all about kind of helping work with the nervous system a little bit and bring us to what we call a parasympathetic state, so a more relaxed body state. And again, you might yawn and you might feel like your breath kind of deepens. And these are all signs that you're dropping into that more relaxed state. And we kind of need that to be a singer. It's very interesting. We tend to learn better when we're in that more relaxed state. And we tend to be more present with other people, with other musicians. So also, obviously, we're talking about nervous, shaky voice. It helps with that. So that's why I'm talking about it. So yeah, there's some physical things. Of course, also confidence with your technique. Here's a plug for that. But working on your technique, knowing your songs, that can really help you as well. You just start to know your voice better and you have better sensation feedback, right? That's part of the whole point of the practice. Yes, so here we're going to talk a little bit about some of the mental things associated with stage fright and anxiety and some really interesting tricks. Again, this is like a tool belt, right? Like you'll find that you might need certain things certain days, try them out, see what helps, and explore with that. And sometimes we just need all the tools in the belt to help us in certain situations. So, the second we know a performance is coming, immediately our mind starts going through a process, right? We start anticipating it. And then as we get closer and closer, that pressure and anticipation can get more and more intense. And that can be a really, really difficult thing. It causes this whole cycle, right? And then it affects our body. So this is the mind side of it. I find there's a couple interesting tricks. One of them comes from this old sort of Sanskrit sort of discussion and practice with negative thought spirals. And when we start having them, and sort of a way to sort of work against that. So it's a series of questions, and don't knock it until you try it, because it's something that really makes sense when you're in one of these states and you're starting to panic a little bit. You ask yourself a series of questions. And the first question is, what exactly am I worried about? And you might want to have a pen and paper. If you're about to perform, you obviously don't need to write this down, but try this, what exactly am I worried about? Because we get this whirlwind of thoughts, right? And it's very hard to pin down, what am I anxious about, right? You notice you're starting to get the feelings, right? You might get ringing in the ear. Your heart might start pounding. You might start to feel like it's hard to focus, right? These are all signs that you're experiencing some anxiety. This feeling of sort of locking and tightening in. All of these things are a sign that that's happening. And you want to ask yourself, what exactly am I worried about? And then the next question is, how does it behave? How does this experience behave, right? What am I noticing? What's changing? So it's all kind of a meditation awareness exercise. And then the last question is it useful? Is it useful to me? Because sometimes when we're stressed out and nervous, it's because it's real and we actually should be, right? That's sort of the point. We need to help differentiate imagined and anticipated anxieties compared to the actual dangers that are around us. And so this is what we do. We ask ourselves these questions, and it can actually help you get into a more reasoned state with yourself. I've done this before to myself. I'm feeling really anxious, and I'm thinking, okay, what exactly am I anxious about? Am I worried that I'm going to make a fool of myself? Am I worried that I'm going to pass out? What am I worried about, right? Like, what's going to happen? If you feel sometimes like you're going to die and you're not, but, and then I talk about that. I say okay, well, how does it behave? Okay, I'm feeling kind of lightheaded. I'm feeling a little disoriented. And then I'm saying, well, that's, obviously that's not useful to me, but, I have to ask myself, has this happened before? I know this feeling, and then I'll say, okay, I'm feeling some anxiety, and it's because I want to do a good job, but it might not necessarily be super useful. And again, it seems silly, but this is something we can do to reason with ourselves as we're experiencing this state, and do this on top of some of these other practices, right? Humming, massaging some points, all of these things contribute to kind of just getting to a more relaxed state. A lot of the times it's the anticipation up until the moment we perform, right? And then at the end, you feel this sort of pattern of like extreme release, almost an endorphin rush, because we've created a cycle of intense anxiety and panic and fear. And then we do our thing, and then we feel better. And we want to try and break this cycle a little bit. We want to anticipate that and use some of these practices. So another one is to engage with your five senses. So again, this might seem like a simple concept, but when you're starting to feel really anxious, it can be really, really helpful. We dissociate, right? So we lose sensation. We start to feel maybe a little numb, a little distant, and you will start actually noticing less, right? And kind of blanking, that feeling of like, well, I don't know what I just did, but I performed and something happened, right? We want to be present, and part of it is to enjoy the experience. It can be really, really enjoyable when you can find that sort of present feeling. So what I say is take a moment and check in with your senses, like literally, the tapping, this is part of that, right? Is to feel that. You can eat something, drink some tea, try to smell, right? Look around. There's all these things. We start pacing and we get this sort of tunnel vision, and we realize that we're not really noticing stuff anymore. So I highly recommend that. Pay attention to your senses. You can anticipate this and have like really nice scents that you can use to kind of break you out of a cycle. A lot of people use aromatherapy for this reason. And trust me, performers, we do all sorts of things like this to just find the way to get in a relaxed state and save that feeling. The more times you do this, sometimes the easier it gets, but at least you have tools, and generally it does, it's like a muscle. We get better and better at it, especially when we realize that nothing really bad happened. So we can start to reason with ourselves that way. The next performance and the next thing that we do. And then also on the line of this sort of five sense thing is I always take a moment, and I think it's really good. Like when you walk out on stage, what are the first things that go through your mind? A lot of people are thinking about what they're going to perform, right? They're like thinking about the lines, the first note. And sometimes like you're there listening to other people and you're not listening to anybody, right? You're just completely in your head. And like, oh man, I wish I was like present so I could enjoy the other people performing, but I'm so focused on what I'm doing. Sometimes a really, really good solution is actually just listen to other people, take a moment, explore that. And then when you walk out on stage, take a moment and make connection with people. So again, we want to, sometimes in our anxiety and our stress, we want to sort of turn inward and dissociate. But actually just, and I swear this has helped me in certain moments. I just go out and I just try to look around, and I see people and I smile, and someone's going to smile back at you, and someone's probably already smiling and looking at you, and you make that connection, and it takes you to a different place. It's for a moment, you have some of that relief and release, and it really can help you. And just remember that a lot of, most of the time, people in an audience, they want to see you do well. We're all very empathetic, and we get uncomfortable when people are really uncomfortable too. And so smiling and looking at people it's like a pact. You're like, I'm here trying to relax and make a connection with you, and that can put everyone at ease, actually. So yeah, I know if you look around and everyone's like frowning and looking at you, there might be other issues going on, and that's fine. But often, like I can swear that this is a really helpful technique. I'll go out, I'll look at people, I'll smile, and then the next step is I'll take that deep breath. Don't forget, like you go out there, you're about to do your thing, people like beeline it, pick up their guitar or whatever, and then they just go, right? And you just don't take that moment to center yourself. And oh, it's so important. You just like what we talked about, right? You can immediately tap into this state. Let your shoulders go, show people that you're trying to relax for a moment. It's totally fine. If you try to hide it, it gets worse a lot of the time, right? So take that moment, be patient. You don't have to be in a big rush there. Now, the other concept is, so we have these negative spirals, and Gary talked about this a little bit. You're sitting around, you're thinking about what things might go wrong, right? And we start to get in a pattern this way, and we could be like, okay, I don't want to mess up there, and then my teacher said don't mess up here, and so, oh man, like I've got to be really careful right there. And it's just this funny thing about our focus. When we start doing that, we're almost like more likely to do those things, right? It's like, don't imagine the pink elephant in the room. And it's like, you're immediately imagining the pink elephant. It's part of what makes singing so hard, and performance, and the mind in general. So one thing that I try to do is when I notice I'm falling into that pattern, I try to switch it around, and I think about, what is my dream performance? Like, what are all the things going well? What are little like landmarks of like, I'm going to nail that, and I'm going to nail that. And then imagine people afterwards, like, wow, that was so amazing. I felt so moved, or just the, all of these feelings, right? You can go that way and try to really consciously work on that imagery, right? Really think about the song that you're singing. Let's say, for example, there's a particular song you're singing, and go through it in your head and visualize it, and visualize everything working smoothly, right? All of the goals that you're working on happening. And we are amplifying and intensifying our sort of that reality. And again, it might seem really silly. You can't only do that. Obviously, like, you need a practice, and a lot of working with teachers and having feedback and stuff is to actually know what that really great experience and course of, through your song is going to be like. But then, you have to flip it around. Like I have some students where you get in a process of refinement, and immediately after working on a song, you're like, okay, I could have done this better, and this didn't happen. And I'm like, wait up. Like, try to find a few things that you did well first. It seems really simple, but it's just a framework. It's changing things around. Like, okay, I got this. I could improve on these things. Change that practice, right? Otherwise, you might realize all you're doing is talking about the negative things in your voice. You're missing out on all these other things that are going well. So I know it's like, it seems like an annoying thing. Again, it doesn't stand alone. Just that positive thinking thing, focus on your senses. Ask yourself these questions about what you're experiencing, right? These are these practices, and do some physical things, right? Like press your points, stretch, try to do deep breathing, try to hum to yourself, right? Find a little melody that calms and relaxes you and makes you smile a little bit. These are the tricks, and you might think that they're silly, but you have to try them, and you have to try them when you're experiencing this kind of anxiety, when your voice is feeling a little shaky. I talk about singing as almost like a balance sport. Sometimes our body is just adjusting, and you might feel that shakiness and be like, oh my gosh, I might be really nervous, but it's just taking a moment for it to calibrate. And so again, doing these drone exercises, the hissing breath thing can really help with that as well. I just want to point in one thing, like, of course, like if you're having like a lot of excessive shaking, sometimes it's because of nerves. Sometimes it can be a physiological thing. So consult a healthcare professional if you're shaking like a ton. Obviously, there's other reasons. And I just want to point that out because, again, I have one level of experience, which as a performer, and the way that I try to calm myself down, but I'm in no way mental or physical healthcare professional. So it's always good to say that. And then, okay, so I think we get to this sort of next concept, and I mentioned it before, which is this cycle that we can get into. It might benefit you to take a moment if you're really getting into this cycle a lot. And trust me, like, been there. So many performers get imposter syndrome where they feel like, should I even do this? Like I'm not even as good as that person, or yada, yada. You have to stop and you have to ask yourself, why am I doing this? what's the point? Is it to impress people? Is it because I love it, because it relaxes me, because I feel connection and community, a sense of belonging? What's the reason? And journal yourself out a little bit here and talk about it. I think it's so important because sometimes we forget why we're doing it, and then we're just trying to think like, I need to be better, I need to be better, I need to be better, and it'll never end, right? And then you look around and you realize like there are so many singers who aren't thinking about that, and it can be very, very frustrating. I know this, trust me. But you just have to remind yourself that you don't know necessarily. We're all working on all of these things, and we're trying to get better techniques that serve us. Technique is just something that works, that helps us accomplish our goals, but it's not an end in of itself. Having perfect technique. It's our voice is a medium that we express ourselves on. So I just like every once in a while to give myself some check there. I find sometimes an imperfect voice is better for expression, right? There's some humanity in it. There's emotion. The thing that is a problem with nerves and anxiety is when we check out, right? Or we're so amped up that we can't drop into our voice and relax, right? So these are these two sides, and we're trying to find this middle ground, and it can be really, really challenging again. So try to see if you can break the cycle by thinking about your intentions. What's the point of this particular project that I'm working on? Sometimes I get people who are trying to sing a song for a wedding, right? And they're focusing on like all these things about trying to improve their voice, but really the most important thing is making the connection, their significant other, being lighthearted about it, expressing your emotions. And so again, like you can miss the point and you can try to do all these fancy things. And I'm always like, simplicity is better in those situations. And this leads me to another concept, which is start small with your performing stuff. It's so easy to traumatize yourself by trying to plan like some big moment of like your debut performance or something. If you're learning to sing and you really want to start showing people what you've been working on, and it's, of course, we have these big thoughts and these goals. And I'm not saying like don't have those dreams and goals, but make little steps to get there. Just like anything else in our technique, we have to do small steps. It's a muscle that we flex and we get better and better at breaking the ice. So I would say like find, like sometimes singing in front of people, can be stressful. So find like an anonymous open mic night kind of thing with other people who are working on singing and performing, and just try to perform there. Practice recording yourself. Even just the thought that like you're being recorded and you might start to experience some of these things, and then you can start working on them with some of these strategies we talked about. Like it's funny, we can play these games, like I'll do this all the time. I'm like working on a song, doing great, and then I try to record it, or just for my own self, right, as a practice, and all of a sudden I'm messing up and I'm making all these little mistakes and we get this spiral. It's a great time to sort of practice calming, centering, trying to get through all of that, and noticing sort of how your body's changing, right? Like when you make a mistake, what do you feel like? We make mistakes and we perform, but sometimes when we dwell on it as we're performing, right, we get stuck in the past, and then we make more and more mistakes. It creates this sort of cascade. So I always remind people, not everyone knows what you're performing, especially if you wrote it yourself. And so you don't have to show people like, that you like make a face like, I made a mistake, right? Sometimes we want to show people. Don't do that. Just move past it. And I've done this as an experiment. I'll be like, did you notice I made that mistake to someone that I know? Or like, no, I had no idea, right? Because I didn't let onto it. I didn't let it defeat me. I just kept moving forward, trying to stay present. So yeah, again, start small, maybe open mic night. Sometimes it's around the campfire, or like you're hanging out with some friends. Again, some people that might be terrifying. For other people, that actually might be a really great way to start and get people to sing along with you, just to break the ice, right? And then you can kind of bump it up and try other projects. Sing in a choir, right? Camaraderie is really great. There's this thought, nowadays that we have to all be solo artists, and I get that, and there's some celebrityism and stuff involved, but music for me, there's so much with the camaraderie, singing with other people, joining in a band. These can be great ways to talk about your nerves, to practice and get comfortable working in front of and with other people, and power in numbers, right? Like there's so many shows where we've all, like a musical or something, and we're all doing weird sort of rituals to get in the right headspace and to be playful, to be silly, and to get comfortable. So trust me, there's lots of that. If you haven't done it, I recommend it. Actually, it can be a really, really fun experience. And if you have done it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's lots of weird stuff. And of course, yeah, that's sort of the concept, is like work small, work on bigger and bigger projects before you start to do anything really, really grand. Yeah, I'd say that's a lot of the strategy, and a lot of this is experimentation. We're all a little different. I don't know. I've been talking for a while. I just always like to check in and ask people if, what's your experience with this? Do you have anything that you found that's helpful? Get a massage before, take a shower, right? What are your strategies? You can put them in the comments later too, of course, no pressure. But I think it's important that we all share these things and acknowledge that it's very human, and that it's actually something you can work on. It's like, why is that person so comfortable performing in front of other people? Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, right? We get in a headspace. And again, yeah, look it up. Like, there's lots of artists that are very, very nervous when they perform. And some of them write music and they actually never perform live in front of people because it's such a hard thing to battle. Yeah. So that's that concept. Oh yeah, I also wanted to mention there are some cross training things that you can do that can be very helpful. You can do, like I mentioned, yoga can be a really helpful thing, right? Any sort of exercise routine. I recommend Qigong practice stuff. I know this, if you're not familiar with that, there's this one website called Yo Chi. That's really, really, I find that lady to be very, very effective. And it's a lot about visualization and slow motion, things like that. Actually really helpful for singing. I see a lot of application in that. We talked about acupressure. There's this practice called the Alexander technique, which can be really interesting to look into. This is about how we sort of hold chronic tension, and they help you with this classic concept of they'll move your body around, and you just try to passively let them move you rather than trying to follow and help. And so it's our ability to sort of detach and let go a little bit, sort of as we're being moved. And yeah, the Alexander technique is something that is a famous actor person kind of developed for performers, because it's strange, but even just standing in front of people or walking on stage, you might think it's very obvious, but once you're being watched, it's actually can be really challenging to do this in a natural and comfortable way. And so that's sort of the concept behind that. It's looking in a mirror and helping sort of walk comfortably, sit comfortably, stand comfortably. And as singers, we tend to get very rigid and locked in place. Same thing with actors as well. And so that actually can be really, really helpful as a practice to sort of drop into soft focus, is what they call that sort of concept, where we're in a rest relaxation state and we're able to be more present with our body and be more aware of what we're doing and how we're holding things. So Alexander technique, Qigong, yoga, acupressure, these are all sort of some auxiliary things, but you can turn them into exercises for yourself, right? There's a centering exercise where you draw your hand in like this, and you have your arm like this, and you draw your hand in and do that kind of a thing. There's so many different kinds of motions, and sometimes it's just the process of doing something like this to kind of take your mind off of the fixation of like, what's going to happen? Oh my gosh, it's coming up. And it's like 3 minutes from now. And the more you wait and anticipate, right, you can build up this sort of anxiety. And then before you know it, you're shaking. And, you know, again, also like, I would say this whole time we're talking about getting rid of shaky nervous voice and performance anxiety. But I just like to point out that like, it's normal. It's part of our body to shake sometimes. And we just sort of have a little bit of a stigma against it. So know that that's actually can be a way that your body is regulating. So sometimes you get the shakes out, right? That's why we do that sort of shaking exercise or tapping, and just sort of let it run its course a little bit. Yeah, that's a lot of what I have to mention for this one. Do you guys have any other questions in general about all of this? Any comments about something that you might do as a strategy? I always just like to collect more and more of these, right? So I just have more tools on my belt. Yeah. Oh, you know, and I had actually another thing I wanted to mention. This is a little bit of a technical thing, actually. So sometimes our voice can get somewhere between straight tone and vibrato, right? Because vibrato, it's not shaking, right? I mean, it sort of is, it's oscillating, but it's not quite the same thing. But our voice can sort of feel like a little unstable, right? Where it's starting to do vibrato and we can get somewhere in between. We call it sort of like a shimmer, or it's like starting to turn over a little bit or spin. Sometimes the trick there, like even if you are just trying to sing straight tone, because again, a lot of the times this is more noticeable with a straight tone contemporary singer, right? The shaking concept, because we're trying to keep a straight level tone, especially if it's like a very relaxed song. Yeah, actually, sometimes the trick is to go into it, right? And this is what I was saying, don't stigmatize it too much. Go into that oscillation state, the instability, and actually sing with some vibrato. If you know how to do that and it's something that you have accessible. If not, then, you know, go and take a look at vibrato stuff. And actually, that might help relieve some of it. Again, we're sort of dropping into a sort of another state when we do vibrato, our body's sort of taking over a little more autonomically. And so actually trying to like elicit that more and be like, yeah, kind of play around with it. And you actually might find that it goes away. So again, sometimes the strategy with these things is to go towards it a little bit, to accept it, right? And this is sort of my big concept with the stress and nerves as we're singing, is don't try to hide from it. Don't try to pretend like it's not there. Actually, like, observe it and work with it. And that's actually sometimes the best way to conquer it, is to name it and to have past experience with it. And the more you name it, the more you know it, and the more you can work with it. And then you can turn it into energy, right? Excitement. Remember I talked about in the very beginning, sometimes we're nervous because we really care about it. So you don't want to just like dull that all away, right? Sometimes we actually want to really work into that, right? To use it as part of our passion. So that's that. Yeah, definitely yoga, meditation when nervous, right? There's a whole field of all of these things. And I really, really highly recommend it. And I put singing as one of these self-care wellness things, right? So you can even use singing itself as a way to calm yourself down. I know we have lots of things that we want with singing, and we, you know, there's all sorts of, we talked about the intentions and goals that we're going for, dreams and such. But you can actually use it as a way to drop into a relaxation state. And so if you haven't done that in your practice, and you're just working on trying to improve and better your voice, I recommend it. Like, play around and see if you can drop into release and meditation by humming, by chanting. All of these things really help. And keep it low in your register. You know, you don't have to screech up really high and prove anything. It's actually better if it's in a pretty moderate sort of area in your voice. So again, you're not alone in this. We all go through this. And ask other performers, like, what do you do for nerves, or what's your experience? And they're like, oh yeah, I don't get nervous. That's probably a lie. I really do think that like we all do. And otherwise you're just trying to be too cool for school. When we care about things, we tend to overthink it sometimes. It's just part of being human. And it's just really hard to be present and playful and enjoy what you're doing. So I recommend give yourself some more free time where you're not analyzing and judging as good or bad, but just exploring your voice. Yeah, and dancing too. Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, like swaying and moving around as you sing, like sometimes when we're performing, right, like especially if you've been in performance realms, like they want you to stay really still and to be like, it's like distracting if you're swaying and moving, and so you can get really rigid from that. I'm plus or minus on that. I think sometimes it can be distracting, but actually sometimes it really helps put an audience at ease. They'll move with you, if you're moving with the music and exploring that. Or like, let's say there's an interlude, right? And you're taking a moment to feel the music and dance to it and be part of that process. That can be really, really helpful. Again, it's sort of a technique to drop into sensation and to use your senses. Listen, right? Listen to what your other instrumentalists are doing or what the track is doing, and try to get into it from there and see if you can enjoy it too, right? Because that's sometimes we forget that as performers, and we think about it just being for other people. So that's why, again, why I showed sort of this humming thing that I do for myself. I highly recommend it. And you might find that you come up with a really cool melody actually from there without sort of like trying really hard to like piece it together. So yeah. So that's that concept. Again, yeah, work with vibrato and see if that helps you by kind of going into some of that oscillation state, and then see if you can straighten it out from there. And the same goes for cracking. I forgot I was going to mention this too. There's sort of an anticipation around, oh, am I going to crack? And this is sort of the nerves and the shakiness that causes us to like kind of flinch in a little bit. And some of it can be from technique, obviously, but sometimes when you're in a difficult state and you're like, oh no, I'm going to crack. Oh no, I'm going to crack. I actually recommend go towards it. Like actually try to own your crack and understand how it behaves and what it feels like. And don't be afraid of it. Again, sometimes when we're trying to avoid something, it makes it happen more often. So I'll be like, oh, take some time. I'm like, yeah, oh, yeah. And I actually just try to feel like, can I cause that to happen? And then sometimes that problem will go away because you know how to control it. You know how to make it happen. And strangely enough, it also teaches you how to let go of it as well. And of course, some of this has to do with technique things too. It's a longer and larger topic because it has to do with switching and registration and such. But yeah, no, I love these, Alex. Yeah, giving yourself some quiet time. I really appreciate that you mentioned that. Sometimes, especially like if you're at a show with other people and like lots of people are talking to you, there's a lot going on, and you're feeling pretty anxious, and you're kind of like, take a moment, step outside, go somewhere quiet, in this part of the five senses thing, listen to nature around you, take some deep breaths. And I do this thing, because I do a lot of online stuff. I'll have like a cranial release thing where I'll kind of sit in that and allow my head and my neck to relax so I don't get as much tech neck. Those kinds of things can be really, really helpful. If you're going in between things, like Gary mentioned earlier, do you give yourself like 5 or 10 minutes to just stop and let your brain rest, notice what's cycling through your head, take a nap. If you can't take a nap, then even just taking a few moments somewhere quiet to sit, to close your eyes, to breathe deeply can be huge, actually. And so you might think you're doing that and actually aren't doing it. And that's me. Like I've been that way where like, oh yeah. And I'm like, I'm actually not doing those things and I'm pretty nervous. And then I started doing them more and I realized that it really does help actually. So make a practice of it. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is really make a practice of this. It's part of singing. I always talk about like technique, ear training, style, and performance skills. And performance skills are things that you can work on. You can train it just like anything else. And we can learn to hack our nervous system, as we talked about, get into a more parasympathetic nervous state where we yawn a little bit, where our heart rate calms down, we start to breathe deeper. These things really help us when we're singing. So yeah, any other questions, comments, just as we sort of wrap up? I know this is a little more heady compared to some of the other things, but I'm trying to give you some practical things that you can actually do, right? So you can do this one, right? You can massage here, you can massage here, working on our long breath stuff. That's why I integrate that into our practice for everybody, is to do deep diaphragmatic breathing, and work into a flow, right? It's not just once or twice. You have to do it until the body responds, right? We'll start to yawn. These various things will happen. Start to hear more resonance. The body starts to relax a little more. And then again, do some humming stuff, right? So the idea is, a lot of times we want like, do this note, then do this note. And there's different reasons why we're practicing, like singing drones and stuff, but you can be flexible about it. That's sort of something that you don't see on the sites a lot, because it's sort of a hard thing to teach, right? Oh, just do some free sing for a little bit. That's sort of what it looks like for me. I'll just sit there and whatever it is. It doesn't have to be minor, but I find that to be a little more soothing for me. So anyways, this is a really important topic. Sometimes you can work on your technique all you want, but it's this mental performance battle actually that can be what sort of gets people sort of stuck. And I've heard, again, really great singers, wonderful voices and great technique, experienced nerves, and sometimes it catches you by surprise. Sometimes sing in front of thousands of people on a stage and I don't feel any nerves, like Kodak Theater, like they're all really far away. You're not feeling that nervous. And then you're singing in a small, intimate space for a few people who are looking right at you, and you're just like, head is spinning, right? So it'll take you by surprise, and you just have to notice when it's happening and why and what the particulars are for you. And journal it, write it out, your experience. And the more you can name it, the more you can tame it. Just came up with that, but I'm sure someone else has said that before. Anyways, yeah, any last questions? We just have a few more minutes left. Anything in particular? A lot of this tension comes from this sort of concept, right? We're trying to restrain that feeling of nervousness, and so we lock into place. And so jaw tension, tongue tension. Sometimes it's technique, and sometimes it's just because we're nervous. When we have an anxious voice, everything really starts to close up a little bit, and you can get really dry in the mouth, lose sense of breath, and you start kind of breathing really shallow. So the trick is to work those things in the opposite direction, right? Counteract it. That's the practice. And it might be hard at first, and you might feel like you're defeated by it, but that's okay. Again, you just have to start small, try little things, little performances, and over time you get more and more comfortable. And then you realize, oh my gosh, I just did that and I felt great. And once you get that feeling, you can save it, and it happens more often. So that's my trick. Yeah, it can be really, really challenging. So again, easier said than done, all of these things. It's a practice, and hopefully it's helpful for anyone who's watching this. All right. Well, I think that's it for today. And again, put anything in the comments, questions, things that you've noticed that are helpful. I think the more of a community we have around this, the easier it gets, because we can support each other rather than this feeling like the industry is all about sort of one-upping other people and being arrogant and snooty about it. I think anyone who's truly truly gifted at this kind of stuff is humble. You know, a lot of the people that really work at this at a high level, I think it's about humility, because you go through this process and you understand what it's like. So if someone's not being humble, they, you know, might have some things that they're working through, and don't let it get to you, because again, we need a supportive community, and then more people will be making art and enjoying it. And it's not about trying to make people feel bad, right? I think it can be really easy to get into that framework, right? Where you're feeling like, oh, I could do that so much better than that person, or that person is really bad at whatever. It's not really helpful, right? Sometimes, you know, when we're working on things, we can talk about things that we want to improve. But again, you know, that usually tells me something more about the other person if they're in that realm, because it's just, again, about intentions. Like, what's the whole point of it? Is it to be better than other people, or is it something else? So anyways, you're very welcome. And I will catch all of you next week. I believe we're talking about vocal health, which will be a really, really great topic. Yeah, and I've got lots to talk about with that, of course. So I will catch you all next week. Take care. Bye.